what accent Fiona has by the end of the day. The topic of discussion is 220. I want to just have a programming note as it relates to today's session, second session today. We're going to start the second session 30 minutes later. So it will just be an hour and a half session. This is to permit a better time zone issue, maybe a slight more bit of rest for our dual presenter today. Lynn has dual duties, both morning and afternoon. So we're going to start 4:30 p.m. my time on the East Coast in the U.S. So I hope that's okay. We're not going to go any later, but I think that should be sufficient time. The topic today is 220. Thank you, everyone, for providing the task force so many good detailed comments in advance for them to consider. It's really helpful. I did note I got to read many of those comments in advance as well. A lot of focus again on the issue responsibility paragraph in this document. I just remind people what I said at the beginning of Monday is that, of course, we want people to raise their issues and be able to put them on the public record and improve the standards for consideration. But some of these topics have been long debated. And so I just give that context is that the hope is not to re-deliberate something unless we have a real fatal flaw in the way that the paragraphs are functioning, and we intend to. We certainly don't mind disagreements and dissents, but certainly we don't want to have a full re-deliberation that will open the whole package of standard, which has knock-on consequences for ISQM 1 and 2 as well. So with that, I turn it over to you, Lynn. Thank you for the task force for all you have done. And I look forward to this morning's conversation.
Thank you very much, Tom, and hello, everybody. I need to explain what I've just explained to Tom because some of you will be wondering what's a bit different about me. I don't have my glasses on because I've had a cataract operation and I can't read close to me with my glasses. So that's why I look a little different. This is so you don't concentrate on why I'm different and you concentrate on 220. I'd like to start by thanking the task force, Josephine, Lynn and Melissa, for all the hard work that they've put in over the last quarter, but also overall. And I'd like to also acknowledge the former members of the task force. Megan, I see that you are on this call, and the genesis of this project and the chair was yours. So I just want to acknowledge and thank you. And I'd also like to thank Brett and Joy for their work in putting together these papers and in keeping us all in line. I'd also like my fellow QM chairs to thank them for the way that they have coordinated together these three projects. I have been reasonably quiet for the last 2 days because I feel like those two projects are mine as well. We've all read them so many times to make sure that we've got them aligned. So I'd like to publicly acknowledge those two people plus Len and all the staff involved for the excellent work that they've done. The objective of this session is that next week we will be in a position to approve the revised standard. And this evening, or this morning, or this afternoon, whichever one it is for you, what I'd like to do is first of all go back to the beginning where we started here and talk about what we were trying to address in the public interest and how we've done that. I'd then like to run through the CAG issues that were raised in the meeting last week. And then the majority of the time will be around walking through the revised draft in sections. I will highlight as we go through each of those sections where there have been changes and what those changes are. And finally, we'll talk about the way forward and the timelines. Moving on, thanks. Okay, this project started with the invitation to comment in 2015 and then the project proposal in 2016. And in those two documents, there are a number of issues raised that people believe needed to be resolved. The first one was the appropriate exercise of professional scepticism, which is of course dear to my heart as being the chair of that working group as well. And we have put significant work into thinking about professional scepticism, not just the word, but the behaviours and actions that make a difference on an audit engagement. And so we have a requirement in 14 on professional scepticism, and we also have guidance on impediments and possible actions. And on exposure, they were very well received. The second issue was proactive quality management of an engagement. And a lot of the discussion we've had in the board has been around this particular element because we have been clarifying the roles and responsibilities of the engagement partner, and particularly that they are sufficiently involved. And that's the bit that's set up in paragraph 8 about where that must be done by the engagement partner or it can rely on others. We've also put some energy into looking at resources and sufficient and appropriate resources, communication, both between the firm, between the engagement partner and the team, and put some emphasis on the fact it should be two-way. And we've introduced a stand-back provision. Next slide, please. In terms of keeping the ISAs fit for purpose, there have been and there will be evolving changes in the auditing profession. So we have firstly clarified the engagement team definition, and we have also looked at trying to look at the evolving audit delivery models such as service centres, and also strengthened the technological resource part of the standard. Firms' policies and procedures was something people wanted guidance on when you can depend on a firm's policies and procedures. And we have clarified where they can, and we have also noted that they may differ if the members of the engagement team are not part of the firm or network. Next slide, please. I've already mentioned engagement resources, but that was one of the issues initially raised with us, and it has been one of our recent issues, the collective competence and capability of the engagement team members, and we'll talk more about that tonight. We've also introduced the firm's intellectual resources more explicitly. I've already talked about robust communication, and I think that is an important part of the standard. And the final part was, the final issue was audit documentation, and that area has been much discussed, and we have ended at a position of linking it to ISA 230 and providing some guidance around that. That is a very, very quick run through the public interest issues that we were asked to address. But I think it's important at this part of the process to actually do a check back to make sure that we've actually done what was requested of us. Thank you. Next slide. We're now moving on to the CAG feedback. And Jim, I'll pass to you when I've made a few comments. We had a good session with CAG last week, and I would say overall my impression was that they were generally supportive, and they were particularly supportive of the coordination between the quality management standards. And to have that recognised by an interested group that provides us with advice, I thought was very satisfying. There was the major discussion was around two elements. The first was the extra paragraph on the public interest that we have added to the objective. We've already talked about that in terms of ISQM1, and and we will discuss it more in this context this evening. One of the concerns raised was the length it now made the objective section, and the second one was the implications for the other IAASB standards. And that is obviously something that was of concern to some members of CAG. And the final issue that they raised was a concern that this standard could lead to people preferring in-firm auditors rather than within their own firm or their own network, rather than other firms as component auditors. So, Jim, that's what I heard. Do you have anything to correct me on or add? Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And of course, I wouldn't want to correct you, but I think you were correct. A couple points. One is, I think that several CAG members went out of their way to point out about the coordination in the sense that some of the comments that had come from the CAG previously were acted upon and reflected in the standard. And so I think that's in part why you received strong support for the direction and moving forward on the standard. I think the public interest comment is an interesting one, and maybe it's one that the board may reflect upon. And that was more or less saying, well, if we specifically identify the public interest here, do we not need that in just about all the standards? And that may be, I think that's a good point to reflect. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. I'm now going to pass to Brett, who's going to talk about the SMP comments.
Thanks, Lynn. Yes, we did receive, along with the other QM projects, a letter from the SMP community. It honed in on 2 points particularly, which are both points I've raised with us before, and they did mention that they were reiterating past comments. The first one was the definition of engagement team being extended to include component auditors. They noted that they're still not in favour of this. The second one was very much the last, an echo of the last comment from the CAG slide, the same one about the potential implications for being excluded more if there seemed to be more work to have to coordinate with them in terms of quality control measures. Lynn responded to that at the CAG meeting quite well. The other thing they did make the point on is that they'll continue to raise these concerns in the context of ISO 600, because as much as anything, that's where the issue really comes to fruition. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Brett. Next slide, please. This is the question in the issues paper, and I'm not going to pause at this stage to ask this question, but I would like you all to keep it in mind, because as we walk through the standard, your comments on the changes we've made, as well as anything else you want to make, will be this question: what are your views on the changes? Because our emphasis here tonight is on the changes. That's not to say we're not interested in anything else you want to bring to our attention, but this is in particular on those changes, because this is the first time you've had an opportunity to look at them. So what I intend to do from now on in is go through section by section the standard, and then give you the opportunity to answer this question and anything else you want to say on those paragraphs. So Tom, I'm not pausing at this stage.
I have a hand up for Rich, and I was just curious. Okay. Rich, would you like to say something before we?
I would if I could. It relates to the comment that Lynn and Brett mentioned, the last point on the CAG slide about the concern about the preference that firms might have to use their own component auditors versus others. And Brett, you made a comment that Lynn answered it well. And so first, I was wondering what that answer was. And two, do we think we have resolved it or not? I don't think we can just say it's a 600 issue, because 600, again, while I agree it's more amplified in 600, it's 600 is based on 220. So I just want to know, is this a lingering issue with our 220, or we've solved it or alleviated the concern or not?
Brett might have to correct me on this, because I may not remember very well what I said, I have to say, Rich. So I'll just reserve that judgment for at present. But what I said was something along the lines was, we wrote 220 with in mind providing quality audits in the public interest. And that's how we wrote it. We wrote it to take into account different structures, different models of auditing. And it was not the job of the IAASB to interfere in audit markets. And we would have no intention of doing that. What we would do was set the best standard we could in the public interest to get quality audit engagements. So Brett, was that what I said?
Yeah, I've just got my notes open in front of me, and I think what the point that Lynn made very well was we've tried to deal with this in a very principles-based way. We're not trying to pick winners. We're not trying to choose who and how firms have to interact with each other. We've simply tried to deal with it in a principles-based manner of working out how different audit delivery models may operate, and then working out what quality issues that may give rise to at the engagement level and how those should be addressed. So the standard in that sense has not tried to alter the landscape or the audit market at all. It's simply tried to address our issues, the ones that we're responsible for. Thanks.
Did they have any request of how this could be helped?
No.
An application material that says, hey, this isn't meant to say who should be the component auditor or who should be they just said they take the implication. Okay, all right.
Yeah. And so I think I also made a point that we have no evidential base for that. So it's hard to make any change on supposition. It can be an opinion, but we write standards on principles. So thank you for that, Brett. I knew there was a key point I'd missed. Does that help, Rich?
It does, and it gives a lot of context to the comment. So thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich, for raising that. I saw Kai's hand up and then down. Kai, do you want to defer to the standard, or you want to?
No. I have a comment when we talk about the standard. So,
okay, that's fine. Okay, Lynn, I don't want to slow you down. So back to you.
No, I'm very happy for comments, and it's really useful to get them. Thank you. Let's move on to the penultimate slide then. That doesn't mean we've finished, it just means there's a lot on one slide. Okay, walking through, we've divided this into a number of areas, and I'll just briefly talk about each area before opening it to comment. Paragraphs 1 to 12 cover the introduction, the objective, and the definitions. And there is obviously in here a strong linkage to the ISQM1s. The first change we have made here is a proposal to move paragraph 6 to paragraph 11 in order to highlight the public interest in a very similar way to what has been done in ISQM1. Having listened to that discussion, I presume we're going to have further discussion of the same topic in the context of 220, and I look forward to that discussion. The definitions, as a result of the ISQM discussion, we will potentially need to look at the personnel and the network firm definitions. If ISQM1 changes them, they will be aligned. We've also had offline feedback about paragraph 8, which is the one that sets up the shall take responsibility or shall do, and they are more of an editing nature than a fundamental change to the concept. So they are the major pieces of changes we've made, and the major bits of feedback we've had in terms of those paragraphs. So Tom, over to you for any further comments, questions, or anything else. Brett, did you want to say something about alignment before we talk about it?
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful just to say a couple of words. So obviously there are quite a number of very small changes here that we've introduced. You'll see it mostly in 220 versus the other standards, because 220 obviously is very tightly interwoven with ISQM1. And so, you know, as we've gone through that process, we've had to make a number of very small and minor wording changes just to refer back to changes that happened to QM1 since the ED. As we mentioned in the paper, we went through a fairly extensive process of getting some volunteers from each of the task forces to look at all the standards so that we could try to nail this down as best we can. And we're confident that we've got things, you know, hopefully very, very close to final with very few changes remaining. But I thought it was worth mentioning that. And just one other thing, I have to give a bit of a mea culpa here. If you're looking at the marked draft, I moved paragraph 6 to become the new paragraph 11, but I neglected to delete it properly from paragraph 6. So it's that's just a boo-boo on my account. Sorry.
Potentially. Thanks, Brett. And also thanks, Josephine was our task force member who did that work, so much appreciated. And before I turn back to you, Tom, Josephine, Len, if you want to add anything to the discussion, please feel very free. Tom, back to you.
I think from an efficiency standpoint, let me deal with the objective paragraph first to give clear direction from the board, and then deal with all the other issues associated with this section. Because we know, and as I said earlier, I view this this discussion on objective differently than QM1. So it's okay for us to land where we landed on 1 and have a different view around the public interest paragraph here, because 1 is, in my mind, entirely an umbrella standard that covers both ISQM2 and the actions of 220. So with that in mind, that's how, at least mentally, I allow us to sort of potentially decouple this discussion. Any comments on this? Isabel?
Hello, everybody. And thank you, Lynn, for this introduction. And in fact, I have no fatal flaw on this proposed standard, but the comments I will make today are more mirroring in parallel what I said on ISQM 1. And so regarding the objective, what I said on Monday was very consistent with what I understood from Tom just right now. And I said that I could understand why we wanted to have this public interest paragraph there in ISQM 1 because of the overarching role of ISQM 1. For me, it's really strange to see a similar paragraph in ISA 220 for consistency with the other ISAs. And also because even if ISA 220 is very important, it's not the overarching ISA for an audit. And if we wanted to have something, it would best be placed maybe in ISA 200. But I was not expecting to see this kind of paragraph in a single ISA or in all of the ISA. I think it's something that should remain overarching. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona?
Thanks, Tom. So I think you wanted to cover off the objective. I don't have an issue with the objective as such, which is paragraph 10 and 11, but it's down in 14. So, but I think you're trying to have the conversation on public interest, which is where that lives. Yeah. So I'll kick off by first of all saying thank you to the task force and to you, Lynn, for your chairmanship of trying to herd the cat, so to speak. You're trying to cut across and keep on top of a number of projects, being ISQM1, ISQM2, ED 600, ISA 600. So well done on the marathon that has been getting us to where we are today. Overall, I think this is in really good shape. I only have one, what I would call a fatal flaw, and it is in paragraph 14A, which is the reference to public interest. I don't think it's consistent with the objective. I don't have an issue with referring to public interest, and I think public interest is served by performing high quality engagements, which I absolutely agree with. So my preference would be that that A gets deleted, but instead, if you wanted to keep the reference to public interest, that it gets put into 14B. Otherwise, I'm a bit confused as to what else it might mean, having called it out as a separate item in 14A. I'm not quite sure how you'd achieve that. And the other bit that I was struggling with was, I think also you've, in your paper, you talk about being consistent with or an alignment with ISQM1 paragraph 28AI, and I'm not sure that that is either. It's not included in the objective of ISQM1 or any of the quality objectives, so I just think we need to think a little bit carefully around that. I don't mind if you wanted to delete it totally, but I was trying to be helpful in keeping the words public interest, because I do think it is important that people are reminded that that is really what one of the key objectives is of doing their audit, but maybe put it into 14B instead. The rest of the comments I'll raise, there's only a few of them, and they're on application material and not necessarily fatal flaws, but I think there's just some inconsistencies again with how it's been aligned, the language has been aligned, and some of the edits you've made. So I'll raise them as we work through the application material, but overall, great job. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. And that's a good reminder as well, that just removing this public interest paragraph from the objective doesn't eliminate references to public interest. It effectively would be calling for remaining in the introduction, reminded that it's all linked to QM1, and then remembering that it's referred in paragraph 14 in probably some form. Fiona's offered an alternative on that. Kai Uwe.
Thanks, Tom, and good afternoon from Germany. I have one comment to paragraph 11. Paragraph 11 is, in my view, not essential explanatory material under the clarity conventions, since the objective can be understood without it. This paragraph does not have the same quality as paragraph 11 in ISA 200. Consequently, this paragraph should be placed in the introductory section or in the application material to paragraph 10. It seems to me that this paragraph is setting a dangerous precedent that will likely impact revisions of ISA 200 and the revision of other engagement standards outside of audits in future. Thanks. I give back to you, Tom.
Thank you. Roger?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and congratulations, Lynn. Look, I think your task force has done a great job in coordination. Paragraph 11, so public interest is one of the areas where we still have a bit of concern. Preference is for the reason stated by Isabel Kaiue, is to put it back into paragraph 6, into the introductory material. Otherwise, we're going to see a proliferation of these through the objectives, and we'll get away from having concise objectives. I can live with it, as stated before, in ISQM1. I understand that as an umbrella standard, but my preference would be there. I'm also with Fiona. 14A jumped out at me too. Our preference was to delete it on the basis that we think it is covered off in the other areas, B, C, D, and E anyway. But I think everything we're doing is in the public interest. So just to call it out in one area is difficult. So for 11, move back to 6, and 14A preference would be to delete. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Bush? You're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you very much. And thank you, Task Force. And in general, based on this meeting discussion, that we support the finalization, assuming there is no substantive change in the final version. However, as mentioned, Kaiui and Isabel and Roger, about the paragraph 11, sorry for being so persistent about the ISQM1 similarly. ISA 200 paragraph 11 defines the overall objective of the auditor. And the ISA 200 paragraph 21 and the paragraph A69 or A71 explain the relationship between objectives of individual ISAs and such auditors' overall objectives. I have an impression that what is proposed at here, 220 paragraph 11, is beyond the scope of the overall objectives set out in ISA 200 paragraph 11. So based on this amended 220 paragraph 11 public interest objective, it seems that the 200 paragraph 11 and paragraph 21 should be changed as a conforming amendments. I understand that the public interest is the most important and the critical concept of auditors. As mentioned by Willie at the Monday meeting, ISQM1 is the overarching standard, but I I also understood this issue is so very important, but it feels strange to prescribe the public interest objectives at the ISA 220 engagement level standard. It is better to put the public interest in the introductory paragraph that is part of 6. Thank you, that's it.
Okay, I see a persistent theme emerging here. And so I'll call on everyone, but if you, as I see it, what Isabel, and Kai, and Yosh are saying is that they prefer the reference to public interest to be moved back to the introduction. We could debate what Fiona suggested as we get to paragraph 14 about the further reference. But this is, again, as I said upfront, as a possibility that this is not an elimination of public interest. Remember, ISQM 1 is an umbrella standard here. It could be different. That the concern relates to the precedent within individual ISAs and what that would mean throughout, and whether each individual standard needs such a statement. One other thing that I note is that we could talk about some of this logic in our basis for conclusions if that's necessary as an option as well. And so explain why we are where we are, and it would address the PIOB's concern as well. So if you're sort of that mindset, I guess rather than have a long spiel on it, I would sort of suggest that you just sort of say, I agree with it for those reasons, or for some other reason, or I disagree. Willy, you wanted to add a clarification?
Yes, thank you, Tom. And I agree with everything you said. I think that the other thing that's important to remember here is that in 220, the objective already very directly addresses quality. Remember, in ISQ 1, we're sitting with the situation of the firm's objective is to establish a system that enables the consistent performance of quality engagements. And that's why we needed the link. Whereas in 220, the objective in paragraph 10, as it is stated, clearly says the objective is to manage quality and achieve quality at the engagement level, which I also think is an important point for differentiating between the construct in 220 and the construct in ISQ 1.
Very right. Marcus, I saw you raised your hand in the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, the sign is not working with my computer, so that's why I'm always raising my hand. Thank you, Tom. So on the point of the objective, it's natural that I don't agree. I think it should be emphasized, and even within ISAs, and I would go the opposite way and try and change all ISAs to include it, to make the right emphasis on public interest. It cannot be said often enough, especially at this time where we have some fraud cases. So basically, I don't agree here, and I want to put that on public record.
Yeah. So Marcus, I just to comment on you, I think in this instance, we're not disagreeing that the public interest is front and center for every standard. What we're saying is ISQM1 applies to all, it covers all and reads back in the structure of our standards as it relates to quality management. And therefore the public interest and our public interest point in 1, where we have put it explicitly in the objective today, therefore applies. We will also continue to make, if we go down this path, a clear statement in the introduction, which also applies to the standard. Now, putting it in as an essential material, you either have to believe it's essential or something else on this objective section. And that really would be, if it's not essential, then we have to make a judgment about our style. We actually have a project related to the style of writing the standards. And if it should apply to all standards, I think that's the proper venue. I think we're concerned that we would be preempting that real discussion without real due process. And it's not a commitment. So the point we're trying to make for those who sort of are concerned about 220 is that we'll have it stated in a number of places, the public interest point, both in the introduction and maybe in the basis and maybe in the application material as well. as places where we could state that. Philly?
I think another aspect that we should maybe also just keep in mind is that, remember, in our drafting conventions, we create a facility of an essential material paragraph for a very specific purpose. So I agree, we certainly agree with the point about public interest, and if this moves back to introductory material, that's fine. Or that will be important, and that's where it will be emphasized. The problem is if we're going to have a proliferation of essential material paragraphs throughout the standards, then it almost works against the purpose of it only being used when it is essential. And I think that's an aspect that we also just need to keep in mind.
Okay.
Thank you for the explanation, and I'm completely agreeing. But what I'm fearing is that it is not understood by all your recipients in that way. So we agree that in principle that public interest objective is there for all standards, but we are not in agreement on the emphasis and how it will be transmitted to stakeholders.
Okay. So we will state clearly, if this is the path we go on, what our intention is. Whether our standards are faithfully executed is a matter for practitioners and regulators and those who hold people to account on its execution. As you said, we're not enforcement authorities on this, but I think we're going to state it. I do believe that there's an argument for making a very strong statement of why we are where we are and what we want to emphasize as the basis as well. And so, and remember, we have committed to it in ISQM1, which was a major decision by the board in this discussion. Let me go through the rest and see where we land. I'm not going to preempt the discussion, but I felt like if people agree with this path, and I saw a consensus forming, I wanted to just preempt a long discussion on this. Rich?
Thanks, Tom. So maybe just maybe getting the niceties out of the way, I did want to thank Lynn, Brett, and the task force for all they've done, especially the outreach they had with us over the past few months to try to see what our issues were and how that might be addressed. And it's clear in the draft that we have in front of us that they did their best to try to be responsive to our suggestions. So I really do thank the task force for that. As I sort of said yesterday and the day before, the irony is that by being clear and fixing the words, it does make it easier sometimes to see what was behind some of our comments, and therefore it makes it easier to crystallize. Oh, well, actually now I understand, but that means I have this issue. And so some of my comments there, I don't have a lot of comments, and I have passed these on to the team in advance, but I do have a couple comments as we start off. So on the objective, I'm not going to repeat what I said on ISQM1. The paragraph itself, I do not have an issue with. Keeping it into introduction is, I believe, the right place to put it, for the reasons that everyone else, Fiona, Roger, Isabel, everyone, I just do not support at all this being in the objective paragraph. I think, as you said, maybe that's where people are getting to. That would be good. Happy if we talk about this as basic conclusions as to sort of the opposite effect of what we would do in ISQM1. But that's fine. I did want to chime in, and I know we might get there later also, but on 14A, so similar to Fiona and Roger, this sentence bothers me. I'm in Roger's camp, though. I believe we should just delete it. I do see Fiona's point of maybe you can bury it into either B and C, but I believe the right answer is to delete it. And And it really goes against some of the comments that were made at the CAG and to some degree what was just said right now. I do not believe in the littering of the standards with the words public interest. I believe we need to get that point across, and 200 is the right place, ISQM 1 is the right place, but having it littered throughout the standards in different paragraphs is not what is going to be helpful, useful. It'd be hard to inspect, hard for teams to actually understand whether they're actually following the standards or not. To me, I equate this a lot with public professional skepticism. We had debates, lots of discussions about the need to deal with that, but not the need just to put in the standard, hey, be skeptical and do this. We want to get actions rather than just words. And I don't think this helps us in that case. So again, my strong preference in this is just to delete 14A. Thanks, Tom.
I guess one thing we need to consider that's coming up is at some point whether we should consider putting something around the public interest point in 200. I just don't know whether that's a more consequential amendment than a pure consequential amendment is. And I think that's a real due process point. Like there may be consequences that we haven't thought of. Like one thing we could think about is a quite targeted approach to that. And, maybe it's a rapid fire due process step that we could do. We've been talking about it. But my concern about doing it is we just haven't thought about it. Like in principle, I'm sympathetic to put it into our overarching ISA, but this would be a potentially on the fly amendment, consequential amendment. I'm not sure it meets the definition of consequential. So I think we should think about that. I take Marcus's point, and it could have a good impact, but I would like to get that right before we do it, because that it would flow through everything. So I put that out there for future discussion. Let's get through this objective part, or we'll use up all of our time. Kai, Morton.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Lynn, and to the task force for the work that's been done. I'll keep this relatively short since I think most of the arguments has already been said, but I'm also in the camp of the objective not being in the right place. The words I'm okay with, but it either should be in the introduction or somewhere else. And I'm also in support of what's being suggested on 14A to delete. So thank you.
Okay. Julie?
Thanks, Tom, and Lynn, great job. I'll have to say I was quite happy to get up this morning and realize you were going to present and I wasn't going to present, so good job. Tom, I'm happy with the way you proposed going forward. I've listened now to the CAG meeting and the conversations on QM1, and I see the points with QM1 being different than the standard. So I'm happy with the discussion so far and the way you proposed it. I do think it's an interesting idea to think about it in ISA 200. I think if any ISA, that's probably where it belongs, but agree with you that this is late breaking news and we probably haven't thought through all the consequences of doing something like that. But if we were, I think that's probably the better placement for this. And I had a similar, last thing, I had a similar comment to Fiona's on 14A. We really thought 14A was part of 14B, really, if you step back and thought about it. If there was a desire to have some of those words that were in 14A still included, we thought they could be consumed into 14B. So that was all I had on this topic.
Okay. I guess let's put aside the 200 issue for a second. And I think there could be different views about whether this is could be a consequential amendment or not. It seems like everyone's agreeing with that this should really be in the introductory paragraph. Let's do 14A different, but we need to get moving. Raise your hands, and I'll come back to you if you want to say something. Raise your hands if you believe that this public interest paragraph doesn't belong in the objective in this standard for the reason said, because you're concerned about precedent, you believe that one is an overarching paragraph, you can make the statement about public interest in both in the introduction and the basis and other areas. Then we'll deal with 200 later. Raise your hands if you're sort of support of that direction.
Sorry, Tom, I don't understand the question. Could you repeat it again?
Is,
what exactly
do we move this back to the introduction? Talk about the public interest again and the basis for conclusions. Recognize, and also in all our public pronouncements, talk about how ISQM1 is an umbrella standard. We have put it, the mention explicitly in that. And that would be a better way to go than having it as revised here. Okay, 1, 2, now 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, I think everyone has said that. It's a unanimous and that account. Okay, put hands down. Because I want to get the right public, get this issue knocked off fully. Anyone have anything to say on this topic before I get to the 200 issue? Okay, no one else. So the proposal was said, and I've gotten some feedback back and forth, is that really if you're going to say something about quality and have it in an overarching standard, 200 is the place. The question, I would like to hear from someone who believes that we could do such a thing now, but it would just meet the definition of a conforming amendment because we've written it here. It's a matter of placement. If someone wants to articulate that view, we could then discuss that. I don't know, Josephine or Fiona, who've raised it with Josephine.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I mean, my thoughts were, and I was actually very sympathetic to the views made. I think Yoshim was the one who first raised it, and others have agreed. We did expose the wording. So our stakeholders have seen the wording, and we got very strong positive feedback on that wording. So, I mean, I would have to turn to Billy on the rules, but in my view, it is a geography issue, notwithstanding that others think could be unintended consequences. But given what people have said, as in it is about the overarching public interest mentality that we have, then it does apply to all ISAs. And in which case, I think it would be perfectly fine to move it to 200.
Okay. Billy, do you have any reaction since you were called upon and I would like to put you on the spot?
No, Tom, in principle, I understand the reason for the desire maybe to put it as part of the overarching standard, which in the ISAS context would be ISA 200. Remember, we also have other standards that are overarching for other types of engagements. I just think we need to, we can always come back to this because I'm just a little bit hesitant that we make a decision today and we haven't thought through the implications just in full context.
What do you mean by come back to this? I'd like to come back to this in the context of the standards approval, or at
not in the context of the standards approval. I would feel more comfortable if the decision is, listen, this is moved back to the introduction section. We'll do the stuff in the basis for conclusions as you've articulated, and we want staff to please go away and have a look and see if it is an option that we do something around the public interest in ISA 200.
Okay, I guess the only question that comes to my mind, which I've articulated sort of that point already, is what tools we have in our toolkit to act quickly if we believe that's the case. Like, how would that process in our mind? Can you do a very targeted amendment?
Yeah, well, at the moment, I mean, if you're going to open the standard, then you have to go through due process. And then that's what it is. Remember, in our framework for activities, we are contemplating that narrow scope amendment avenue. We haven't used it in the past, but I mean, this could be an area where that could be applied.
Okay, that's sort of what I had in mind, but maybe this would be the first case of it. Lynn, since you're the task force chair, I'll turn it back to you to give your reaction.
Thanks. I was going to say almost exactly what Billy has just said. I think there is a separate consideration of 200 in the context of all of the other ISAs, and I think it's would just complicate the process at this point in time to try and do that. So after listening to all this discussion, I think we're all very clear that the public interest is vital. So, I mean, that's a given. And in 220, what we will do is we'll put the paragraph 11 back in paragraph 6 of the introduction. So it is prominent and it is still there. It actually flows nicely with paragraph 7. So I'm quite happy with doing that. And in the basis for conclusions, we'll add some explanation, but 200 will go on a separate track somewhere, somehow.
So that's an important point. Like I happen to be sympathetic. I just worry about unintended consequences, even despite the due process that's been followed, because 200 is so overarching as well. The only thing I would say is there sympathy for exploring this rapid path by the board? At least I think we should give at least some essence. Like I think people seem like, let's explore the 200 option on this public interest point sooner rather than later. Is that the sense of the board? I see lots of nodding. Okay. Any other comments? Marcus?
Just one on the sooner or later. So I would prefer the sooner.
Yeah, I think the emphasis was on the sooner. I just think we have to talk about how rapidly we could deploy this. Certainly, this is my opinion, not for the board. This is the type of issue that I would have thought that we're actually talking about by adding to our toolkits to do rapid fire, very limited scope improvements of a standard. This would be, from my old days, very similar to the IFRS improvements project. James?
I agree with the direction as articulated by Willie and Lynn for this standard. I maybe suggest that we don't define now the scope of any type of consideration for the public interest within 200. I firmly believe that when the topic does get addressed, it will be perhaps more complicated and with more weight than what we would give if we just decided now that it's a limited amendment. So I think the question is leaving the opportunity and the question of considering the public interest and recognizing that in 200, that may be a limited amendment or it may be something different. And I think the board in due course should have an opportunity to consider. If a proposal is put forward for a limited amendment, perfect. But I do think the board should be afforded the opportunity to deliberate the project as we normally would.
Yeah, I think it's more, as Billy said, it would be instructing the staff to explore what the right way forward. That's the now.
Yeah.
Okay, we have Eric, Roger, and Isabel that we really do need to close. Bob, I'm sorry. For some reason, yours is not showing up. Okay, Bob first.
And I just wanted to comment. I certainly support exploring the 200 option and things like that. But I'd also just kind of add to this that I think it is a definition of now. Having been on the board for a while, I think we were looking at some very important projects on the board's agenda coming up. And the fact of clearing the quality management, getting that project done, I think there's some very important other projects, and I'd be very cautious about letting some of those other important projects that are coming up now be pushed back or slide to take care of this issue. So I fully support the planning committee and the staff and everyone exploring what we can do narrowly, but carefully consider the impact on the board's agenda and on other projects. Thanks.
Sorry. We're not going to be, what we're suggesting now means asking the staff to thoughtfully think about it. But I did want to give a sense that this goes to the back of our list in terms of what we'll explore. Eric?
Bob articulated my views very, very clearly there. I just don't see this as being something that has to be rapid compared to some of the other things that we really do need to address. So I support exploring it, but I don't think it's that critical right now.
Okay, Roger?
I probably do see it as critical. I think it is an important area in the current environment, especially given what we've just had the public interest framework out. So I would explore it. I think James articulated it well. It's not so much are we opening up 200, it's where are we best placing this public interest imperative. And I think that's the way to scope a narrow amendment, and I would see it as being something that's reasonably critical.
Isabel?
I agree that it could be a good candidate for different response mechanism, and it's quite interesting at the time when we're discussing this framework for activities, because it's very important, and we could have believed that any rapid response mechanism would be just for minor amendments, and this one could be a major one. So I agree that we need to take the time necessary. As someone mentioned, maybe it's not only in ISA 200, maybe we also need to put something in ISA 3000, for example, which is also an overarching standard. So we need to think about it. But even if it's important, if it remains limited, I think it does not preclude, I like this word, it does not preclude us to try to have a faster process, because if what we propose is a short document and limited amendment, we can try to have a quicker process because it won't take much time for people to go through it. And that's really interesting at the time when we're trying to see how differently we could work on some projects.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Just wanted to come in. So I am fine with the approach we're going towards. I think this is something that the planning committee and the staff need to get together, have some discussion, put some framework around it, both on terms of, is it just a 200 amendment, or I think more broadly, try to ask the question of where best this should be considered, and then have work that into our planning. Does it fit? To Bob's point, if it purely does not fit, well, then it doesn't fit. But if it fits and we can see a way to get it in, then I'm happy that we take it on. But I just think it needs to be scoped out and thought about, and instead of just the knee-jerk reaction of just thinking if it's 200, because it might be broader. But I'd leave that to you and the planning committee and the staff to do that first bit.
Okay, this is where I think we are. We know where we are on 220, right? It's that paragraphs are moving to the introduction. We're going to put a lot of explanation in the basis. We're going to be very clear in our messaging that surrounds the standard. And there's an appetite to explore how this public interest component serves throughout our standards, 200 being a possibility. what I suggest is that this is kicked to staff and the planning committee as something to explore in due course and reasonably good due course, in the context also of our framework for activities, which is supposed to be finalized shortly, which may provide us an avenue, and that we report back to the board shortly. And we have to really think about it. Remember, I think the points that were said about all the other public interest issues that we're doing have high priority too, and we have limited staff. But I think the big point to be made here is that there's appetite amongst the board to consider this, and that should give comfort to public interest authorities that the board is really serious about this public interest point. In fact, we're talking about a more holistic way of addressing it than we were just with QM as a narrow element of it. So I think we're send it to the staff and to the planning committee to think about an appropriate course of action that has no unintended consequences, and that we should move forward. I leave it that's as the way to deal with the non-ISA 220 issue. Marcus, I make a number of public interest points, and I would be remiss not calling back on you if you want to say something, but I think you get a real strong intent from the board on this one.
Yeah, you can be sure that the PIOB will follow up on this strong intent.
Yeah. The PIOB follows up on many issues, so I'm looking forward to the follow-up on that, and I look forward to my discussion with the PIOB in a couple of weeks too, where I'm happy to talk about it. But I think we don't want to have any unintended consequences as well. We want to be as thoughtful as possible in dealing with this. I think we're aligned in terms of our public interest commitment. Lynn, I think that was a longer discussion, but an important discussion for the board. I hope we still have time to go, but if we have to go an extra 15, 20 minutes, then we'll go there. But I think this probably was one of the more contentious issues.
Thanks very much, Tom, and thanks to everybody. I'm going to take requirements 13 to 24 as one group. We've heard you on the subparagraph 14A, and what I propose to do there is we'll try and combine A and B and see if you like it. If that doesn't work, it'll be deleted. So it's one of those two options, but we'll try the combination one first. In terms of paragraphs 13 to 15, there are no other than alignment comments, other than the one we've already discussed. On ethical requirements, that's all been agreed with IAASB, and there are basically alignment changes there. And it's the same with acceptance and continuance, which is 22 to 24, which has been agreed for some time. So I'll pause there for any further discussions, except for 14A, because we've done that, from 13 through to 24.
Okay, 13 to 24. The only thing I would say, Lynn, is that we focused on the objective, and we haven't had a full discussion on other paragraphs 1 through 12. So people wanted to come in there too. Well, let's just do 1 through 24 right now. Recognize that covers a number of paragraphs. Okay, Bob.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for picking up. I do have a comment on paragraph 8. And Lynn and Brett have been very responsive to this. We did share some suggested drafting, and I think, Lynn, in your opening comments, you referred to it as some editorial changes. I just like to be clear, we do pretty extensive outreach at the AICPA, and we had a group of 14 or 15 people reading paragraph 8 because of its critical importance to understanding and applying the entire standard. And you know, I would say that after I explained what paragraph 8 was indicating, everybody was in agreement. So there's no fundamental conceptual issue with the responsibilities of the engagement partner, but it was very striking that we pretty much had a hung jury or a split decision on the interpretation of what paragraph 8 was saying when it was read by individuals who had not been privy to all of our deliberations and board meetings and things like that. So while it may be you know, not a fundamental disagreement with the intent of paragraph 8, we do believe it is critical that some changes to that wording be employed because of the potential for inconsistent interpretation and application of the rest of the standard. And I just point out, you know, as an example, paragraph 21, I think where it indicates the engagement partner shall take responsibility for determining. So there we have a combination of determining and taking responsibility for. Was a little bit confusing. So Lynn, we provided some suggestions for you and Brett offline, and look forward to seeing that coming back. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Isabel?
Yes. So as I said, my comments are mirroring the ones I made on ISQM1, and therefore I have a comment on A17. And I think it was raised by Bob also on Monday. I'm still unclear on whether a firm that is not a network firm, so let's say a component auditor that is not a network firm, not belonging to the same network as the group auditor, is considered or not as a service provider. If we read ISQM1, we consider that it's a service provider. If we read A17, it's not considered as a service provider. So we need to clarify all this before the approval of the standards. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabel. Sue?
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Lynn and the team for all the work here, and also a special thanks for taking the time to speak with us yesterday to run through some of the comments that we have sent in previously. Very similar to Bob, I was coming back on paragraph 8, and very similar kind of challenges that we were having. I think particularly around the some of the practical impacts of the engagement team definition, including people external to the firm, and we've sent some suggestions. It would be great to perhaps get some of the material that's highlighted in paragraph A22 into paragraph 8, which is thinking about different actions where the firm policies only apply to people within the firm and not to external people. But we've provided some suggestions there, and I think also similar to Bob as well, some questions around the engagement partner must do or shall do versus taking responsibility. But I appreciate the time that we had yesterday, and you have our comments to consider as you go through. Thanks.
Thanks. A17 seems to be coming up a little bit. Brett, you want to provide a little context on that?
Thanks, Tom. I thought it might be helpful, and Lynn, maybe just let me have a crack and then you can correct any mistakes I make. The A17, we have heard a couple of comments, and it came up in the offline comments as well, so I thought it might be helpful just to head some of that off. When we wrote A17, we're really just trying to make a point that there are 4 possible sources of members of the engagement team, and we had to separate out B and C because this also has to work for the ethics board, and the ethics board doesn't have a concept of a service provider. Now, it wasn't intended to imply any sort of relationships between the 4 groups, but we've come to realize that that's how people are reading it. So we will be proposing a change, I think. We haven't spoken to the task force yet, but Lynn and I have discussed this, and so we'll be taking to the task force a proposal that we clarify essentially the potential for overlap between B and C, and make clear that, write it in a different way so that there isn't an overlap. It is something that we'll need to talk to the task force about, so I'm not prejudging that conversation, but I just thought that might be helpful to share to avoid people feeling like they needed to make the same point. Thanks.
And Tom, can I just pick up on paragraph 8, please? Bob, I didn't mean that the issues you raised were unimportant. We're taking them very seriously. We've just got many different constructs at present of paragraph 8. So we're trying to edit them all together in some way that makes it clearer. So we have got loud and clear the message about paragraph 8 from the comments, and we are taking it seriously, and we will change it and bring that back to the board. So if anyone else has got the same comments on either 8 or A17, those are both, we understand the issues.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Kayue?
Thanks, Tom, and Lynn, again, thanks for your work, and thanks to the task force and the staff who stands behind the task force. It's a lot of work to do such a standard. I will start with my comment referring to paragraph 12, little d. I'm sure you will not surprised that I'm seriously concerned about the impact of the definition of engagement team on the application of ISA 600 and on the application of ethical requirements to components auditors, particularly when those component auditors are from outside of the firm or its network, or are situated in different jurisdictions with different laws and regulations, languages, and cultures. I'm not convinced that this extension of the meaning of engagement team is really practicable. In particular, I'm not convinced that direction, supervision, and review can be performed in the same way. I have a second comment referring to paragraph 14a. The requirement added in paragraph 14a is more aspirational than measurable and is therefore inappropriate. Rather, compliance with ISA 220 serves to help members of the engagement team to act in the public interest. The sentence could be changed to state this and then be moved to the application material to this paragraph. This sentence sets a dangerous precedent to have engagement team members to be subject to a requirement to act in the public interest, something that cannot be, in my view, be determined either by the firm or regulators. If a firm or engagement team member were to go to court in most jurisdictions of which I'm aware, this requirement would be regarded as unfulfillable by the courts and therefore void. I have 3 further comments to paragraphs in the application material. Give me just a second. The first refers to paragraph A22. There I would like to thank the task force for adding the new guidance in paragraph A22, but I'm not convinced that this will completely alleviate my concerns with the extension of the definition of engagement team to component auditors as I have described. Then I have a further comment referring to A33. As you know, I have made suggestions to link the impediments to non-compliance with the Code of Ethics. The suggestions were vetted by a member of senior staff of the IAASB and are in line with the results of work done by the Professional Skepticism Working Group. What I can not understand is the technical or political reason for the task force not having adopted those suggestions. And my last comment referred to A38. There, it is unclear to me how and when these kinds of laws and or regulations, etc., would become relevant to the engagement. Perhaps some additional application material would be helpful to augment this rather cryptic material. So this has been my comments. Thanks, Tom. I pass back to you.
Thank you. Sachika?
Thank you, Tom. And thank you very much, Lynn, and your team for your hard work. Particularly, you are in very different time zone, and I know it's very hard to, working from our area. And so thank you very much. I have two comments. One is on paragraph 8. And my comment is a bit different angle from Bob, and I think it's more a simple one. I have a comment on the last sentence. The last sentence say that the firm or other member of the engagement team may provide information, but I think perhaps it's also necessary that the firm or other members of the engagement team provide information. So for me, may provide seems to be a bit weak. So I wonder whether we can use a little bit stronger language such as may need to provide, but perhaps we can think about the language. And the second point is on paragraph 822. First of all, I very much support this paragraph 822 because I particularly heard a positive reaction from practitioners in small and medium firms to this paragraph, as they often need to assign individuals from other firms and different actions are necessary. And this paragraph explains that taking different action depending on their circumstances is fine, so it's helpful for them. But I have one suggestion in the third sentence. The third sentence says that these differences may be exacerbated when the other firm is in jurisdiction with different legal system, language, and culture. But for me, exacerbated seems to imply that having a different system is sort of bad thing. But I don't think it's not the intention, of course. So perhaps I wonder whether we can use more neutral wording such as expanded instead of exacerbated. So perhaps we can take a look at that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rich?
Thanks, Tom. So I have a couple comments that come into these paragraphs. So the first one, paragraph 8. Similar concerns as expressed by some of the board members, especially Sue and Bob. So I would like to see where those end up. Not going to go further on those, but I have a broader question that's on the same paragraph, and it's really on how just the terms, determine and shall take responsibility, and what that really means in practice. When you walk through the examples on how the requirement would be discharged in practice, the distinction for the engaging partner on what that person would actually do to do shall determine or shall take responsibility was great to me, and in our outreach. Again, we had a number of people around the table, and hard to get to the same place. Maybe similar to Bob's discussion about that they got a little bit better once Bob or me or Jamie explained what was trying to be made. But again, they're not in the room, and therefore they don't have all that background. And so, you know, I think that this line between these two is going to be hard, and we really need to find a way to make it easier. Clearly, application material would help, but I think it does need to go, you know, further than that. We need to make it clear. Right now, there's a level of ambiguity where I'm not sure people will fully understand what is needed and what practically would be the difference between the two. You know, one doing shall determine, one shall take responsibility. And, you know, while we might be able to say, hey, there's not a big difference on what you would do, you still get there, you do this, you do that. The concern I have is how this would be inspected, and a difference in mindset as to what is it required. And I'm not sure that's the same mindset between the people who are going to read this and try to follow through to this. So I just think we need to relook at this area. We have put through some editorial suggestions, and hopefully those would help clarify this. Again, it's not throwing the everything with the bathwater. It's just we need more clarity so that we can actually implement this part of the standard. So that's my comments on 8. I also had one on 12 that I just wanted to sort of reiterate. I mean, I've said it in ISQM 1, I said it in ISQM 2. I think the terms individual and personnel are important to make sure that we clarify. I think what Julie has put forward might get us there, but then we obviously need to then make sure that they get picked up through 220. And again, you know, I'll reiterate, I think to the extent that we can, I really think where we use words that are defined and then we use those words in different contexts, even if you say, hey, you should be able to work it out, I think why do we need to even have that chance of misunderstanding? You know, I'm sure we can use different words. And again, person instead of individual is just one example. So I would ask the task force to think about that. Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Lynn and the task force. Thanks.
Thank you. Fiona?
Thanks, Tom. I just wanted to put on the public record, I've given offline comments on A6, A13, A22. A22 slightly different to Sachiko. I think the way it's been edited makes it very definitive and absolute, which is I'm not sure was your intention. And then when you sit back and you look at all of the content that's been added, it is quite confusing. And if we really need that much clarity added, maybe it goes in implementation guidance or, you know, some other form rather than in the application material. And then on A13 in particular, I just think it's not correct to say that the engagement partner is designing firms' responses. They don't. They design engagement specific responses, which is what you've talked about in A9. So I think that's an easy fix. Thanks.
Thank you, Fiona. Imran. Can't hear you, Imran. Imran, we'll come back to you. I can't hear you right now. Kai Morton?
Thank you. And again, thank you to the task force. I think my comment is a bit overarching in general as well, and somewhat following up a bit on what Rich said. Some of the feedback that I got from the outreach that people that haven't been involved in the reading or developing the standards, they're sometimes having difficulty seeing the difference between some of the paragraphs in the standard. Some of the standards, if you haven't been involved in all the details here, may read and may be understood to be on the exact same point. One of the examples could be 15 and 29 was what I had. What does really add if you're already complying with paragraph 15? What is 29 really adding? And some of the others are also, when you come further down, which we'll come to later, but they're very detailed, broken out in separate requirements. And the feedback that I got was that sometimes then okay, what's the real difference and how should we document what we've done in accordance to the requirements? So thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
Thanks, Tom. And I'm going to offer a contrary view, I guess, is on a cold read of paragraph 8. I think it's fine. I, in substance, don't have any issue with paragraph 8. I think that, Lynn, you've received a lot of comments, it sounds like, on paragraph 8, and there might be a change coming potentially. I guess I would just be worried if we're changing the meaning at this stage in the game on paragraph 8, because I think we've deliberated this many times and we got to this place. And so editorial change I could probably live with depending on what it looks like. But I guess I just fundamentally didn't have a problem with paragraph 8. And if we're changing any of the meaning, I would be worried about that. So I just wanted to put that on the public record, that even on a cold read by others, not just me, we got to the place where we expected to get to in reading paragraph 8. And so I think we provided you an idea there, Lynn, about flipping the order of the responsibilities just because ED 600 refers to them in a different order. I don't know if that helps anybody's concern or not, probably not, but that was just something we had come up with. But I just wanted to put my support behind paragraph 8 the way it is right now. I had the similar comment to Fiona on A13, so I won't repeat what she said, but the exact same comment about designing the responses and whether or not that really resides at the engagement partner level. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. We'll try Imran again. He's having some connectivity issues today, so that's why he didn't appear. Imran?
Yes, hopefully this is better, Tom.
It is.
Oh, great, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. As the discussion evolved on paragraph 8, I wondered what the issue was, because like Julie just before me, when I read it, I recognized it as being something we had fought over before, and on one hand, I thought we had reached a good middle ground. Having heard the discussion and the potential for paragraph 8 to change, I reserve my judgment, therefore, about what it will change into. The reason I say this is because my reading of paragraph 8 is that it describes some principle, and then the rest of the standard unpacks what it means in relation to planning, acceptance, engagement resources, and other things. And it seemed from my reading that these were extremely well correlated. If we were to change the content of paragraph 8, it is likely that we could put one of the paragraphs that hang off it out of kilter. So when we say in other places that the engaging partner shall remain alert, or the engaging partner shall evaluate, or the engaging partner shall take into account, or the engaging partner shall determine, all of those things need to remain pure in relation to the paragraph 8 formulation. So I'm comfortable with paragraph 8 now and very wary about what the consequence would be if we make any changes to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not I have a comment here, but I sort of alluded to it. I'm sort of where you and Julie are on this. This seems a topic that's fundamental and something that we've discussed on numerous occasions. So I get the point from my perspective, the need for improving clarity so people understand what it's meant to be. But I felt like I understood where we were getting to on this. And I'd be very cautious about any significant changes. But that being said, I could see the task force, as they will do with everything as we get to a finality, reviewing it. So that I just urge significant caution on this. There's been I can't think of now, maybe the objective is taken over from this, but no issue more that we've discussed than paragraph 8 to this point, in which I think we've reach conclusion. I get that people don't all subscribe to the conclusion, and that's the case, but I thought the broad sense of the board was where we were. Reading, that's Len, you come in, and then I need to turn it back to the task force.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I too, I guess being a member of the task force, but I want to speak from 600 perspective, because back in March when we approved 600, we had a discussion on 220, particularly on paragraph 8. So we built our 600 ED, the expression, take responsibility, all those wording from 8 into 600 ED, particularly paragraph 6 in 600. Then we build special consideration requirement based on all the languages in 8. I thought back in March we landed in a pretty good place. That's why we voted out the ED in 600. I'm just cautious that bigger changes might impact the type of comments we're going to receive, because the wording, the expression in 8 is in 600. And also perhaps, of course, I've seen some of the comments coming through as a member of the task force. Maybe additional guidance application material, but I'll be very cautious about a lot of changes to 8. It's speaking from 600 perspective, Tom.
Yeah, I understand that. That partly drives what my other thoughts on this standard, but I'm one of 18. But I'm not sure that everyone was suggesting a revisit of 8 anyway. But as I saw, there were, in this round, as I see it, there was some talk on 8, there was talk on the public interest point on 14, and there were a number of drafting suggestions throughout, which obviously the drafting ones the task force will consider. Lynn, did you see it any differently?
No, I didn't. There's just a couple of comments I'd like to make. I'm pleased that in the discussion, what I heard was a majority of people still supported the concepts underlying paragraph 8. And I think that's really, really important, because I think, as Imran said, the whole standard's then written based on it and reinforces that. So what we'll be trying to do in any changes we make to paragraph 8 is to improve the clarity. And so that's all we will be doing. The concept, as far as I'm concerned, is locked and loaded. What we'll be looking at is if there are any words that we can make it clearer. The second thing is, yes, we've got a number of comments. At this stage, I think it's highly unlikely that we'll be making any changes to the requirements on what we've seen, but a number of changes on the application material. So this is just to set some expectations as to our reading of where we're at this point in time. So can I move on, Tom?
Yes, unless there's any other comment. I don't see any.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll now move on to, we'll take paragraphs 25 to 38 altogether. They are the paragraphs on resources and on direction, supervision, review, consultation, EER, and differences of opinion. We talked in the June meeting extensively about human resources and aligning that with ISQM1. So those paragraphs are, and the changes we made are highlighted in paragraph 10 of the issues paper. We have made one change to a requirement, and that is 25, and that was changing the sentence around so that you take into account all of the factors, not just any individual aspect of it. So I'm not going to actually go through the issues paper because you will have all read that, and I'll just hand it back to Tom to open it for any comments on those paragraphs.
Okay, any comments? You're just doing 25 to 28?
No, to 38.
To 38, okay, 25 to 38. Someone asked me about a break. It's a 2-hour meeting, so unless we're going to go extend, I suggest we continue through. And if you need to step out, obviously step out for a second and just let me know, and I will make sure we come back to you if you have a comment. Okay, Imran.
Thank you, Tom. I should have spoken sooner, but now that my connectivity is restored, I really want to say congratulations to Chairman Lin and the task force on the work that they have done. Thank you for this. This standard has come a great way, and the impression one gets after reading it is that the objectives we as a board set have been achieved in how it is currently presented. With that said, I naturally therefore wanted to just mention at this point that I had absolutely no fatal flaws with the standard, and I was looking to support it in the remaining discussions in the days ahead. Of course, I'll be alert to changes that may serve to shift the balance in the standard from where we currently have it. I have provided some some very late but minimal comments to the task force, and they're all of a housekeeping nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Chong-Wei?
Thank you, Tom. So my first time taking the floor this evening, just want to extend my congratulations to you, Lean, and task force, and of course to the staff, Brett and Joy. Thank you for the work done. I'm actually very happy with the draft in front of us. We've heard multiple comments through these meetings, but to me, I'm actually pretty happy where we are at. I've sent through advanced comments. They are mostly questions on typos, editorial, and maybe some cross-referencing questions. One of which was relating to cross-referencing to QM1. I went through the referencing to QM1. I couldn't see a very structured way where we decide to have a reference where we don't. So I pointed some out, but I'll leave it to the task force to make sure that everything is consistent. On the paragraphs that we have now, I've just maybe 3 quick comments to make, if I may. The first one is on A7T. So this is a late comment. I apologize for that. But just looking at it again, the second last bullet point, ability to exercise professional skepticism and professional judgment. I feel that unlike the rest of the bullets, this one, while not impossible, is less likely to be observable or ascertained through objective means. And is in fact influenced by the other bullets. So I'm just wondering, I know it's late, but wondering whether it makes sense to actually bring it up to the lead-in paragraph rather than as a bullet. And also I think it provided with the prominence that it deserves. That's A7C. Next comment is on A98. A98. So I'm just trying to flip through the pages. So A98, it starts off by saying the engagement partner may exercise professional judgment in determining which formal written communication to review. I feel that it looks a little bit contradictory to the requirement itself, because the requirement say that they have to review the communication, formal communication, before it goes out. So here you say you exercise judgment, decide which one you review. So it looks a little bit like it's inconsistent to me. So I wonder whether we should just remove formal, because I think the example that follows actually talks about communication, the normal course of business. So maybe it's not formal, maybe it's less important. So you exercise that judgment. The last comment I want to just make is on A103. In the description of ISQM2, the second sentence says that it deals with the EQR's responsibility. I think QM2 also talks about the engagement partner's responsibility around EQR as well. So in QM1, I think in one of the earlier paragraphs, we have some wording that describe this, which I thought may be a little bit better. So I would suggest that we have a look at that and consider whether that might be a better option. So that'll be all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chong-Wei. Kaiwe?
Tom, thanks very much. I have one comment to A94. The first sentence in this paragraph, A94, represents a hidden requirement that would make non-compliance with the firm's policies and procedures non-compliant with ISA 220. This sentence should, in my view, be changed to reflect the requirement in paragraph 30 by being worded as follows. The engagement partner is required by paragraph 30(a) to determine that the nature, timing, and extent of direction, supervision, and review is planned and performed in accordance with the firm's policies or procedures, professional standards, and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Eric?
Thanks, Tom. I just wanted to express my support for these paragraphs. One that I'd had concerns with before was paragraph 25, and I believe it responds to those concerns. So I just want to thank Lynn for that. And we have sent some offline comments on the application material. So thank you.
Thank you. My read for this is that no one's expressed any fatal flaws on these paragraphs, Lynn, and that you've gotten a few drafting suggestions or slightly more than drafting suggestions, but no major change required. So that's all the hands that we've had.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks everybody for that. I think the paragraphs we've gone through extensively in the past, so it's good to get to this position, and we'll certainly consider and have considered some of that input that's already been given to us, and we will get back to you on that. That therefore brings us to our last three paragraphs, which are 39 about and its associated application material, which talks about monitoring and remediation, the new stand-back paragraph, or new for the revised standard, and the proposed change to 41 on documentation, where we deleted the dot on direction, supervision and review. I know there are split views on that, but we did debate it at the last meeting and the majority said cut it out. So that's what we have done. So those are the last three. All the other changes that are made, and there's not a lot of change here, the alignment changes. So Tom, back to you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Any comments on the final three paragraphs in the accompanying application material? Fiona.
Thanks, Tom. Again, just going on the public record that I've provided a comment on A115 around, as just a minor tweak around being clear that when you're doing the planning, you're not actually looking at the responses as well, you're designing the responses, so that could be fixed easily. Otherwise, I'm really comfortable with what you've got in the requirements and the rest of the application material. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Rich?
Thanks, Tom. Just a comment on paragraph 41. You know, to me, what came a little strange is that the documentation requirement is the only one addressed to the auditor. There's also one that's addressed to the engagement team, which is paragraph 37, and everything else is to the engagement partner. And, you know, to me, that just seems strange. And I think you could easily fix it by rephrasing this to the engagement partner taking responsibility, which would make sense anyway. It just, you know, it's an oddity that I'm not sure we need to maintain. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else on the final 3 paragraphs? I don't see any others. So we have Fiona's comments and Rich's on this. Any reaction from Lynn?
Yes, just to Fiona's will certainly correct that. And Rich, when we changed it to the introduction being ISA 230, it refers to auditor. So we need to be consistent with 230. So that's why it's auditor. It is the convention across most of the standards, so it's likely to stay as auditor. Others have picked that up, but that's a technical reason why we're leaving it there. And Brett might like to elaborate on that.
Brett?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify this same disconnect, the same perceived inconsistency is also in extant 220. It's a necessary linkage that we have to have in order to make 230 not be read in a different way. So we're just trying to be consistent with all the other documentation requirements in the standards are always addressed at the auditor. Acknowledging that 220 is a one standard where it looks a little bit unclear, but people have been doing it successfully for as long as 220 has been around. So I don't think it's going to create any practical difficulties.
Rich, I saw you came off mute, so I assume.
Yeah, so I understand that and understand the consistency needed with 230, but presumably you could fix 37 then, which wouldn't have that same linkage, and it would at least mean that all the requirements are to the engagement partner. Where you can, and the one that you have to keep for auditor, you leave as auditor.
We'll have a look at that, Rich, and see if there are anything we haven't thought about that might cause a problem, but we can certainly look at that one.
Okay, no, I think that brings us to the end of the walkthrough of the proposed ISA 220. Lynn, do you want to talk about next steps?
Yes, please. Next slide, please. Okay, I haven't said thank you for all the written comments yet, and I wanted to leave that to the end because we have appreciated people giving us those comments. If anyone gives us comments after today, we're going to find it harder and harder to consider them. So if you can please get in any promised comments ASAP, we'd appreciate that. Because we are now going to meet as a task force and consider those comments. And we also, between now and early next week, obviously have to make sure that any changes we make and any changes ISQM1 and ISQM2 make all align. So we have this ongoing triangle to keep working and make sure it all fits together. We'll present you with I'll talk about timing in the next slide, but the next step is to do an updated draft, all working towards approval on the 23rd. And I'll just go through timing quickly now. We'll have our task force meeting. We've got a task force meeting on the 17th. We'll be posting the final draft on Friday at the 18th, and I think we're planning to do that by 12 noon Eastern time. We've got times booked on, we are available on Sunday if anyone wants to talk to us. Please book that in the normal way that's been agreed, and the rest of the timing I've already talked about. So that's what we're working to. We are very happy to talk to anyone about their comments or to clarify anything. So feel free to contact us. and once you've read the updated draft, or even before that if something else pops into your head. So I think with that, that's it from me and the task force. Can I just thank everybody very much for their valuable input and for the constructive way this session's been dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you to the task force for all the hard work that you've been doing, and thank you to the board for, again, I echo your comments. Actually, we handled 220 and we addressed the big public interest issue in a holistic fashion. So I think that this was a great discussion. I turned to ask Marcus and then Jim whether they have anything to add to the conversation.
Thank you, Tom, but I guess I have already said.
We lost you at the end, but from what I understood is you said your major concerns or issues from a PIOB perspective. Is that correct? Yes. Jim?
And Tom, I just thank you to Lynn and the task force for considering the CAG feedback, and it's actually pretty consistent with the discussion at the board. So thank you.
Vili, anything from a technical director perspective?
No, thank you, Tom. Nothing further from me.
Okay. Any board member like to raise any issues? Okay. In terms of the outreach to the task force and whether you'd like to have a consultation, it will run on a very similar procedure as we talked about for ISQM1 with sign up, Zoom links, breakout rooms. So if you have any questions on that, I know the team will be happy to respond about the administrative element of how that will function. I know there's quite some work ahead, but I feel really good about where all three standards lie in terms of the types of comments that we've received, and also the drafting. I think the extra 3 months has really paid off in that regard. So I think that's really been important. And I clearly that the task forces have been using that time to work hard on their efforts. We will reconvene, as we discussed, half an hour later than originally proposed, 4:30 East Coast time in the US, half an hour later than you had planned. We'll take an hour and a half for this second session of the day for our time and European time, or the morning session as we like in Asia Pacific. So I think that will go ahead. And so thank you all, and I will speak to you shortly. Good day, good night, good afternoon.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.